this, a phosphide, which weigh as much as 40 tons. That is a single mineral formed, of a specific chemical composition, and in the general way of looking at it, it is a mineral that's supposedly formed over, the bigger the crystal, the longer it took to form. So something that, if this took a week or supposedly like this to cool down, something that was 40 tons, I'll let somebody else estimate how many millions of years supposedly that took. But go ahead.
But all those halos would have escaped over 3 minutes then.
Well, after about several minutes, the polonium is gone. So unless you do it, it's true. If I wanted to be very rigorous about it, if I wasn't, well, I'll simply say this. If I wanted to be very rigorous and say reproduce what you have in here now, what's in here now, I'd say take this piece of granite in the laboratory, heat it up, melt it, let it begin to cool, and not only when you need to get something like this when you finish, but it should also have polonium halos in it. That's the real test right there. Well, I wanted to try to make it easy on people.
So that means if I had the knowledge to do this in the facilities, I'd have to do all this in 3 minutes, have the same grains, and have the halos trapped in it.
Well, if you really wanted to reproduce what is a part of the primordial Genesis rocks of the planet, yes, you would have to reproduce the granite, and you'd have to reproduce the polonium halos in the granite. That's true. Absolutely.
That I would like to see.
I would too. I see we need the moderators up here because I see there are questioners in the back. Would you want to stand up and let one of you stand up and invite the individuals to come forward?
Well, I'm Bill Bloss in the physics department, and I'd like to compliment you on a fine piece of work in the radiation halos, and also on a rather, in my estimation, creative explanation for the ones that are difficult to explain on the basis of the uranium chain. I'm bothered, however, by a comment in your book on page 49, where you say the last chapter emphasized that when I associate polonium halos in granites with extinct natural radioactivity, scientists understand this to imply only a few minutes elapsed from nucleosynthesis to the formation of the solid Earth. Okay, well, that follows. And you say, as figure 2.4 illustrates, which was up on the board, only nucleosynthesis that could accomplish this feat is nucleogenesis, initiated by the Creator, that of virtually instantaneous creation of the Earth. I would suggest that you consider a parallel. I'm sure you're familiar with the line spectrum of hydrogen, and in 1900 it was not explainable, not understood, although it could be calculated with the Balmer series. Perhaps Balmer or Bohr might have come along and suggested that these were, in fact, Genesis atoms. And it would be very much similar, in a sense, to the argument that you're making. Because I cannot explain this on any other basis than the one that I put forward, and because nobody will refute the argument that it must stand. And it doesn't really follow that that's true. It doesn't follow that you're wrong, but it doesn't follow we should all jump up and try to refute what you say, mainly because you haven't broadened the spectrum of your argument to include a preponderance of the evidence.
I appreciate you saying what you did. Let me just ask you, in the context of your comment about the Balmer lines, and of course the fact that in 1900 they could not all be accounted for. Now, what I'm saying, I think, is substantially different than the analogy example you've just given, for the following reason. At the time that we were discussing, bringing out here, which of course was the turn of the century, we both know that quantum mechanics had not even come into existence. We know that the Bohr atom was not around at that particular time. As you say, there was some basis for understanding some of the spectral lines, but not all of them. Now, is it not true that we realize, the history of physics tells us, that the physicists of that day realized that they were coming into a period where new ideas, new concepts in physics were going to be generated? As we both know, in the late 1860s, we have Hertz, we have Maxwell with electromagnetism, we have the discovery of radioactivity, we have the X-rays in 1897, Becquerel, and then around the turn of the century, radioactivity being discovered, then alpha radioactivity by Rutherford, alpha, beta, and gamma rays. Now, this was a period of time, I think, where physicists generally recognized that new developments were immediately on the horizon, and they didn't have an understanding fully, for example, of the atom itself. Now, I didn't find, as I read the history of physics, that people were postulating that the bomber lines were necessarily the result of creation. What they were doing was asking whether or not those lines were going to tell them something about a deeper understanding of the theory than they had at the present time. Now, coming back to 1987, we have come down the road, 80-some-odd years, and as you well know, being in the physics department, we've progressed considerably in our understanding of nuclear physics. But you see, what I'm saying doesn't involve any deep, complex nuclear physics. It doesn't involve any deep, complex geology, supposedly, except that I claim it can't be reproduced. In other words, there are no principles here that need yet to be discovered that would enable people to go and do this synthesis or this falsification test. No one is claiming that we have to have new laws. That's the whole point, that the uniformitarian principle says the laws that we know today are sufficient to reform this granite. Whereas in 1900 with the bomber lines or thereabouts, people were actively searching for not only an explanation for the bomber lines, but for many other aspects of atomic and nuclear physics. So, I'm not interested in... we can have a difference of opinion, but I'm just telling you the reasons why I would feel differently about your comment.
Well, I think really what I was trying to suggest is that one has to consider the modeling possibilities. If you cannot generate a model, which you have generated a model, okay? At the same time, a model could have been generated in 1900 that said, the Creator is trying to send us a message. These are Genesis atoms. And nobody at that time could have refuted that until they were able to come up with a model which was able to take it into account. Now, you may have the answer. Your creative model may be the answer. But it also equally well, and considering the preponderance of evidence for the vast cosmological considerations and data which have been observed, it would seem that it's not likely, but it could happen. I'm just saying, consider the model. You say the only answer is, and I think that is terribly presumptuous on your part.
Okay, is it... Let me say I'm happy for the applause when people, feel like that you have someone here representing your viewpoint. I think that's great. That's what we're here for. That's what America is all about. Now you need to let me respond. Your first name was Bill, is that right? Is that correct? I'll put my glasses on. I can't tell whether you're nodding. Was that correct? Bill. Would you mind if I call you Bill? Okay. Bill, just let me, without going into saying too much further, I do want to say this. In the comment you just made, and the difference that I still see in what you're saying and how you're proposing an analogy here is this. Back in 1900, you see, if people were to ascribe a created explanation to the bomber lines, it would not be possible for them to say, well, these are Genesis atoms, and isolate these atoms from anything else. Because every hydrogen atom that came into the laboratory and was put into the spectrometer would show those lines. And so they would end up having to say, Genesis atoms everywhere. And so therefore they would be in the position of saying creation, creation in the here and now. Well, see, I'm not saying that. I'm saying that there is something very specific that happened in the past. I'm saying that the Bible talks about a 6-day creation, something being called into existence, And I'm saying they're the crystalline basement rocks of the planet. I'm saying that there are sedimentary rocks on top of those. These relate to the flood. I'm saying not that there's anything wrong with the present-day science of physics, chemistry, geology, as far as the mineralogy or petrology is concerned. I'm simply saying it's an interpretive framework in looking at the data. And I'm saying that this interpretive framework can be ascertained or judged on the basis of present-day experimentation. And I know it's difficult in a situation like this where people have reputations at stake. This is a university and people have courses in progress and they're teaching students, about various things for me to come and to challenge this